Welcome to our second Sunday program on February 13th, 2022, direct to you from the Hawaiian Islands. We are the second Sunday programs are sponsored by Friends of Great Swamp National Wildlife Refuge with generous support from the Marta Heflin Foundation. Today we are happy to welcome Kate Toniolo, and I first met Kate when she was working in the Refuge System Regional Office here in Hadley, Massachusetts. She was liaison to our friends groups and did a wonderful job, and we were delighted and very sad when she decided to take a managerial position at the refuges in the Hawaiian Islands. I remained a Facebook friend of hers and was really interested a couple months ago to hear how her team had fought another incredible environmental battle. And I will turn this over to you, Kate, to tell us that story.
Awesome. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. As we say in Hawaii, aloha kakao, which means hello, everybody. I will share my screen and start from the beginning. Let's see if this works. All right. You guys got my intro page here, my title page with a nice, beautiful close-up of a yellow crazy ant.
We do.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm thrilled to be with you guys today. This morning where I am, this afternoon for most of you. I was really happy when Kathy reached out to me to ask me to present about the yellow crazy ant eradication project that we did at Johnston Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. This was a huge project. It was several years in the making, and it's definitely something exciting to share with folks. So just to give you a little bit more about myself, as Kathy said, I formerly worked in Region 5 or Legacy Region 5 in the Northeast. My name is Kate Toniolo, and I am the superintendent of the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument. Superintendent's just another way of saying refuge manager or project leader. I've been out here in the Hawaiian Islands for 5 years. And prior to that, I spent 17 years in the Northeast region at Patuxent Research Refuge, and then at Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, and then in the regional office. So my whole 22-year career has been with the refuge system. I also, when I first came out here, I was the deputy superintendent for Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument. But 3 years ago, I started in this position as the superintendent. So while most folks are familiar with National Wildlife Refuges, they might be a little bit less familiar with the Marine National Monuments. They are all units of the refuge system. There are four Marine National Monuments in the Pacific and one in the Atlantic that's actually managed out of the regional office. But I'm going to come back to this map a few times. It gives you a good idea, good way of showing where we are in the world, in the place. So there's Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, which is the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, and it includes the Hawaiian Islands National Wildlife Refuge and Midway Atoll National Wildlife Refuge, but it is managed out of our office in Honolulu. Then there's the Marianas Trench Marine National Monument by Guam, and that is managed out of our Guam office. There's my refuge, Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, which is kind of spread out across the Pacific. You can see in the middle of that map. And then Rose Atoll Marine National Monument, which is actually in the Southern Hemisphere in American Samoa, and it's managed out of an office in American Samoa. So Pacific Remotes is also managed here in Honolulu. The Marine National Monuments of the Pacific are some of the largest protected areas in the world. At one point, we were the largest, Pacific Remotes. Then Papahanaumokuakea was expanded, and that became the largest. And now I think Papahanaumokuakea is number 3. So I think we're still in, Pacific Remotes is still within the top 10 of the world's largest protected areas. So That arrow is pointing to Oahu, where I am located in Hawaii, in Honolulu, and then there is the monument. So the monument itself was established in 2009 by President George W. Bush. And it was established through the Antiquities Act, which is an act that enables the president to set aside large areas for protection based on scientific or cultural need. And Pacific Remote Islands specifically was established to protect the unique ocean resources and ecosystems that are around 7 islands within the Pacific. The first refuge, or the first unit of the monument that I'm going to talk about, is Wake Atoll in the west. But then there's also Howland and Baker, Jarvis, Kingman and Palmyra, and Johnston. When the refuge, or when the monument was first established in 2009, it was about just under 90,000 square miles of area that was protected, and then it was expanded in 2014 by President Obama. And the expansion area, so initially all the units of the monument went out to 50 nautical miles around the islands. The expansion basically pushed the boundaries out to the full extent of the economic exclusive zone, which is basically 200 nautical miles around the islands is where the US has jurisdiction, and it's called our economic exclusive zone, or EEZ. So the expansion expanded the areas around Wake, Johnston, and Jarvis. So Wake Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. I use monument and refuge interchangeably. The monument's kind of the administrative, think of it kind of like complex and refuge, where Great Swamp is part of, I don't know if it's called the Lenape complex now, but it's part of a larger complex, but there are refuge units within it, but we treat the whole thing as a national wildlife refuge, and then each unit as a refuge. So Wake Atoll is out in the Western Pacific. It's about a 5-hour plane ride from Honolulu. I actually just got back from Wake, did a quick turn and burn flight over there. It is an active Air Force installation. So the land itself is managed by the Air Force, but it's under a use agreement with the Department of Interior. So our boundary goes from the mean low tide out to 200 nautical miles. Wake is one of the only places in the monument where you have Laysan albatross. There's also red-tailed tropic bird populations, white terns. Wake has a very strong history as well. All of our islands out here in the Pacific were touched by World War II. A lot of them were attacked, even our small little equatorial islands where very few people were stationed at the time. But in particular, Wake has the story of the Battle of Wake Island, where Japanese forces actually did take control of the island for at the very least a year, I think, but more than that. And one of the most important monuments on the island is what's called the 98 Rock. And that's what you see in that picture at the bottom, where it says 98 US PW 51043. And that was 98 US prisoners of war. So when the Japanese took over the island, they took people who were there as prisoners of war. One person was able to escape and scrawl this on a rock to let folks know that they had been there. And then unfortunately, everybody, all the prisoners of war were executed. So I stood in front of that this week, and that was a pretty significant experience to be part of. Going in counterclockwise direction, the next island we have is Howland Island. Howland is famous for being the place where Amelia Earhart was supposed to land when she disappeared. Howland became a national wildlife refuge in 1974. It's part of our equatorial islands in the monument. It's a low, flat, dry area. It does have a day beacon called Earhart Light, but it's home to dozens of seabirds, or I should say dozens of species of seabirds. Thousands upon thousands of actual seabirds use the island, as well as strawberry hermit crabs, the little guys that you see in the photo here. about, oh, and Howland is an 8-hour boat trip, or not 8-hour, 8-day boat trip from Honolulu, to give you an idea of how far away it is. Baker, on the other hand, is only 8 hours from Howland, so they're very close to each other. Baker Island National Wildlife Refuge, again, also established in 1974, also has a day beacon, also a home for seabirds, great frigate birds in this particular photo. All these islands, they're at the center, but they have beautiful coral reef ecosystems. And then going further out into the water, you're dealing with huge seamounts and lots of amazing underwater life that is protected, and highly migratory wildlife, both fish and birds, utilizing the monument. Going east again, you have Jarvis Island, which is the driest and hottest of the islands. That's actually a dry lagoon in the center there. But there is vegetation. There is a ton of birds. I think it's estimated the world's largest sooty tern colony is on this island, with over 1 million birds. Jarvis is the last of our equatorial islands, but it's unique in that with the ocean currents nearby, it gets a lot of the upwelling from the western coast of South America. So it's got a hugely diverse, huge biodiversity, lots of nutrients in the water. Howland, Baker, and Jarvis were all also colonized by a group of young men, mostly Native Hawaiians, in the 1930s and 40s, in an effort to retain the United States claim over the islands. They were initially claimed under the Guano Act, but then these young men came and basically helped these areas retain US jurisdiction, and then eventually they had to be removed from the islands due to the war. These islands were attacked, and 2 young men actually did lose their lives on Jarvis Island. Jarvis was also, unfortunately, the site of a more recent ecological disaster. With 2015, 2016, it was a severe El Nino year. And being so close to South America, it was hugely impacted by that. And it collapsed the coral reef that existed at Jarvis. The water was too hot for too long, and 98% of the corals died and disappeared. It wasn't just a little bit of bleaching. It was a complete collapse of the coral reef ecosystem. There has been, the best way I could describe it would be like a wildfire, forest fire that burns the seed stock too. Like it basically collapsed everything. But you know, we are keeping an eye to see how the coral reef changes over time, and there are some signs of recovery. It's not necessarily, you know, when an area gets bleached and then things come back in and it recovers quickly. This is kind of a rebuilding of the coral reef. And the next trip out there should be early in 2023. So we're looking forward to see kind of how the reef is recovering there as well. Going north, the next one is Palmyra Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. This is the one place in the monument that you can visit if you have the means. So if you have your own boat and can make it down there from Honolulu, or if you're volunteering for the Fish and Wildlife Service or the Nature Conservancy, we actually manage this in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. It's the refuge I've been to the most of all of the ones that I manage. And I've only been there 3 times, but that's still a lot for most people to try and get to Palmyra and aren't able to. It's in a kind of sweet spot in the ocean in the intertropical convergence zone. It gets 200 inches of rain a year. So it has this really beautiful, lush rainforest and amazing coral reefs. I like to say it's what I would think the biblical Garden of Eden would look like. I'd be hard pressed to find a more beautiful place on the planet. But there's tons of sharks, tons of super healthy, vibrant coral reef ecosystem, lots of manta rays, giant clams, just a very, very cool place. And we do have a permanent presence there year round. We have staff on the atoll. Just a little bit northwest of Palmyra is Kingman Reef National Wildlife Refuge, and Kingman and Palmyra were both established in 2001. So outside of Wake, they're our youngest refuges in the monument. Kingman Reef is pretty much all underwater. There's usually about an acre of ephemeral sand that is there at any given point in time, but nothing that stays. So it's mostly just underwater. And given that it's very close to Palmyra, but you need to be able to get a boat to get there, we don't get out there very often either. And then last, but certainly not least, the place of the hour, Johnston Atoll National Wildlife Refuge. Johnston is the oldest refuge within the monument. It was established in 1926. In 1923, the Tanager expedition, which was a scientific expedition to go to some of the islands out here in the Pacific, visited Johnston, saw its being a place that was hugely important for seabirds. At the time, like many of the old refuges, birds were being targeted for their feathers for millinery trade and poaching. So it was recommended for protection. And President Calvin Coolidge established it as a federal bird reservation in 1926. Beyond its use as a refuge, there's been a heavy military presence over the years at Johnston. You could see the largest island there, Johnston Island, actually looks like an aircraft carrier from the air. And that was due to military use of the island. This is a little bit closer up look. We've got 4 islands. The original portion of the refuge was part of Sand Island, and then kind of the northeastern corner of Johnston Island. Johnston itself was expanded by coral dredging, and then Akau or North Island and Hikina or East Island were created as well. I love that animation. I don't know if you guys saw that. So like I said, the Tanager expedition came in 1923 and went through and visited Johnston Atoll, where Bulwer's petrel is that little dark blob there, was seen, as well as several other seabirds. And then in the 1934, Johnston came under the jurisdiction of the Navy through an executive order with President Roosevelt, but it was still subject to being a refuge and breeding ground for native birds. So military was there, but the refuge was also still there. And of course, World War II, this was a very strategic point in the Pacific because of its closeness to the main Hawaiian Islands. It is the island in the refuge in the monument that is closest to the main Hawaiian Islands. And it was built up. You could see the years that basically show what size the Johnston Island was in the beginning, and then what it was eventually built up to through coral dredging. So 1941, attack on Pearl Harbor. There was also significant attacks on other islands in the Pacific. So Wake Island, all of the islands pretty much, with the exception of Kingman Reef. Palmyra was attacked, Howland Baker Jarvis were attacked, Wake was attacked, Midway was attacked, and Johnston was attacked. Johnston was able to, with the military presence that was there, they were able to defend themselves from the Japanese sub that was attacking them. So it became a very strategic and important outpost during World War II. And then after World War II, it remained a very significant military site during the Cold War. Some of the things that were done there, nuclear testing. There was a lot of nuclear weapons testing. What you see in the top left corner was a catastrophic failure of a rocket called Bluegill. It was the project was called Bluegill Prime. That was actually, believe it or not, a controlled explosion. Like they discovered that it was going to end up exploding, so they did it in such a way to try and minimize the amount of damage it was going to cause. But the explosion did cause a massive outfall of plutonium. on the island. So there is plutonium contamination within the soil and within the lagoon. Johnston then also became a place for chemical weapons storage. In the lower right-hand corner, those are barrels of Agent Orange, which also were leaking at the time. So there is a legacy of contaminants at Johnston. Again, military use, pretty much all of our islands have some form of historical contamination within them, whether it be fuel or PCBs or things like that. But Johnston in particular has some nasty stuff in the ground because of its use as a chemical weapons facility. Then eventually, in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, it became a place for chemical weapons destruction. So that's the JCADS facility on the left, which was the Johnston Atoll Chemical Agent Disposal System. So basically all chemical weapons were put through that system in order to render them inert. And it wasn't just US chemical weapons, there were chemical weapons from USSR that came and were destroyed there as well. And then eventually when the stockpile was fully destroyed, the building was torn down and stored in bunkers that remain on the island. In 2004, Air Force personnel. So eventually I forgot to mention that it went from the jurisdiction of the Navy to the Air Force. I believe in was it in the 40s or the 60s? It was after World War II. So it transferred from the Navy to the Air Force. And then the Air Force left in 2004. They closed the base. We did have staff that were on site. And then the Air Force still retains jurisdiction over the land because of the contaminants issues that are at Johnston, but we also still manage the refuge. So it's a little bit about the history of Johnston, some of the important reasons for the ecology of Johnston. If you look at this map, it is the only place within nearly 575,000 square miles for seabirds to land and to nest and rest. So it's pretty significant in that regard. It's also significant in that with its location and the currents in the area, the coral that's there acts as a seed stock for the rest of the main Hawaiian Islands. So all the coral larvae that it surrounds Johnston or is within the coral reefs there gets spread out to the main Hawaiian Islands and also Papahanaumokuakea. And then we have the yellow crazy ant. So after the Air Force left Johnston and our staff left Johnston, we started coming every couple of years to do routine biological assessments. And on one of those trips in 2010, the yellow crazy ant was discovered. This is a non-native invasive ant that was found swarming seabirds. I'll actually show you guys a video. Let me know if it comes on your end. Laurel, can you give me a thumbs up if you're seeing that?
It is working.
Okay, great. So that's a red-tailed tropic bird. They nest on the ground because they, here in the islands, these birds evolved without predators on the ground. So a lot of them will nest right on the ground. And this poor bird, as you can tell, is being, every time I see this video, I just want to wipe the ants off of him. But it's not, these aren't innocuous ants just crawling on them. They actually are spraying formic acid, which in turn injures the bird, either that's been known to blind them, can cause beak deformities, erode feathers. And basically they were in such huge concentrations and causing such a problem that there was, total nest abandonment or nest site abandonment. This here you can see on the left is a red-tailed tropic bird chick that was attacked by ants. and on the right is a healthy chick. So you can really kind of see the stark difference in what kind of impact the ants were having on the birds there. We don't know how the ants got there. We're very, we take biosecurity very seriously when we go to the islands. All your soft gear has to be brand new and frozen for 48 hours before it comes onto the islands. It could have been brought in on equipment. It could have been brought in, we don't know. Could have been brought in on a boat. There are yellow crazy ants here on Oahu. But we're not really sure exactly how the ants got there. We just know that once they got there, they started thriving and really started having a negative impact on the birds. So what did we decide to do in relation to that? Well, with the permission of the Air Force, we got a program together called the Crazy Ant Strike Team, or CAST, which was meant to be a program to go out for 9 months and try and deal with the ant program. We also got an invasive species large grant for it. We got $1 million to go out and work on this. So this program started, we found the ants in 2010. This program started right after we found them. So early CAST went out there again. It was meant to be a 9-month program, but one of the things they discovered was that the bait that they brought with them did not work. It worked on ants here in Oahu. It did not work on the ants on Johnston, unfortunately. So there was a lot of experiments and trying to find a way to get a concoction that was going to actually kill the ants. And what ended up happening, the concoction that they stumbled on that ended up being effective was a slurry of cat food, Caro syrup, and dinodifurin, which is also known as safari, is a pesticide. And they shot it out into the habitat with these guns, like you see the young man holding there, squirt guns, not really a gun, but basically they would squirt the slurry into the habitat, and it ended up being very effective in treating the ants. However, it wasn't 100% effective. It got the ant populations down over 90%, but there were still lots of ants hanging on. So CAST continued after those 9 months, and eventually in 2015, to get the remaining 1% of ants, they reformulated the bait to include hydrogel. And the hydrogel basically is it's a chemical component that doesn't break down in water, so it lasts much longer in the environment. Same other mixture, same with the cat food and the Caro syrup and the dinodifurin, but adding it in a hydrogel bait, and the ants went nuts. They loved it. And they would actually drag the hydrogel pellets into their colonies underground. So that really was what helped us get the last bits of ants that were there. In addition to, baiting for ants, the CAST crews did lots of biological surveys. They, monitored the ant populations. All the ants that are on Johnston, and there are several species, none of them are native. So it was one of those things too, that it was very easy where we didn't have any non-target organisms, what we would call, or animals that we didn't want to eat the bait. That's one of the hard things in a place that has native insects, that you don't want those native insects to get into the bait and die. You just want your ants to get into the bait and die. And so Johnston, it was a bit easier in that regard because there were no native ants, and we were able to just kind of take a firebomb approach when it came to the ant populations. So CAST also did lots of bird surveys. They would go out, they check. We had sooty tern colonies on there. They checked the populations of the red-tailed tropic birds and how they were recovering from the ant infestation. They would also do sea turtle surveys and go out and do fish surveys in the coral reef as well. So they did a lot while they were out there that was also not ant related, but a lot of ant related work as well. So the last yellow crazy ant was seen on the Refuge in 2017. Basically, this area here that's marked off in red on this slide, this is the YCA infestation area. So this is where they were originally found and where they had spread to. And this area got broken down into 50-meter squares. And as the ants were disappearing, the crew would have to search, hand search. So get down with their hands and looking through these areas for the ants. They had to search each square 4 times with no ants sighted for us to declare eradication. So basically, you know, we did adaptive hand searching after an area had been cleared, had been done 4 times and no ants had been found. That one was considered completed. So it still took a long time, even though the last ant was seen in 2017, it took a long time to go through and search these areas and make sure that the ants were really gone. We also had a couple of evacuations due to hurricanes. So we had to pull our crew off a couple of times. And then of course, COVID-19 came and there was a 6-month period where we weren't able to get anybody out there to be a crew because we had people there year round. We would do crews from December to June and then June to December. So from June to December 2020, we did not have anybody on the island because we were in the throes of COVID at that point. But as we were starting to kind of close in on eradication, one of the things that we did was we contracted with a local contractor who has dogs that they use she trains them on scent detection of invasive species, plants, animals, diseases. The dogs that she has have done avian botulism. They've gone out and searched for that. So that's Kyoko Johnson in that picture on the left with her dog Solo. And we contracted with Kyoko to train her dogs, Solo and Guinness. Guinness is the shepherd mix that you could see on the boat on the right, along with Solo, who's the yellow lab. She trained them to be able to discern the scent of yellow crazy ant. Took about a year, and they were able to successfully detect them in the environment here on Oahu. And then we got ready to bring them out to Johnston. It was the first time we had to get special permission from the Air Force to bring the dogs out. We weren't sure how they were going to do on the boat and whether or not they were going to be seasick because it's a 3.5-day boat ride to Johnston from Honolulu. And they weren't super happy on the boat initially, but they did manage to survive and figure it out. But that's, you know, one of those things that you never expect to do in your career is finding ways to deal with dog seasickness. I want to show you a video real quick, and I'm going to have to escape out of here and share something else with you guys. Let's see if I can. All right, can you guys all see YouTube here?
Yes.
Great. All right, I'm going to play this video. This was Solo training in Manoa Valley here on Oahu looking for yellow crazy ants. You can see he's got something. He's smelling something. And he found it.
That's great.
So that's Solo. That was during his training, was able to find, let me see if I can't get back to sharing my PowerPoint. we back to my, you guys can see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so that was, they, both Solo and Guinness did excellent in their field trials and figuring out, you know, being able to smell out yellow crazy ant outside of all the other ant species, you know, very specifically getting their ant scent down. And we were able to bring them to Johnston. One of the things we did do is they carried yellow crazy ant coffee filters, like coffee filters that had, or filter paper that had the scent of yellow crazy ant on it, as well as little tea balls, you know, like the that you use to steep your tea with like loose herbs, ants in those, and they would hide them in the habitat because otherwise if the dogs were out there searching the area and not catching anything, they'd go crazy. They'd get bored. They wouldn't be able to focus. So they did hide those in the environment to keep the dogs interested. So, and then there's Guinness hard at work. So they were able in the end to search about 73% of the infestation area. Not 100% because we hadn't been on the island for 6 months. So there was a lot of overgrowth. So there were areas that just was impossible for them to get to. There's a good portion of the area that was just on the runway. There is an airplane runway there from back when it was part of the Air Force. So those areas aren't really, weren't very ant heavy in the first place, but they managed to get through 73%, walked over 118 miles in those 2 weeks, had a detection distance average of 6.5 meters that they were able to smell the ant balls 6.5 meters away, and were 100% successful in finding the ant hides the entire time, and did not find a single yellow crazy ant alive. So they did a great job. I love these maps because it just shows you a little bit better of the area that they covered. And you can also see the two different styles that they had. Solo was very methodical. So you could see like there's like kind of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for Solo. And then Guinness was all over the place. So that area in the south where it's just like a dog just wandering, they had GPS collars on that tracked their movements. So that was how we're able to tell which areas they covered. And then, so this is their actual tracks. And then with their scent detection distance, this is how much area they covered. So they didn't get the runway where you could see those X's kind of in the middle. In the area just south of the runway, only the central part was covered. But they did get a good majority of the infestation area. So the dogs were there to be our QA/QC. They were not there to help us declare eradication because we still needed to hand search those areas, complete the adaptive hand searching, and do the 4 searches of each one of those squares in order to declare eradication. So the dogs just gave us extra confidence that we had done a good job and that we weren't missing anything, because ants are small and really hard to see and really hard to try and control, especially when their colonies are based underground. So Cast 20 was our last group to go out there. This is Cast 20 here, in front of a sign that Eric Baker, who's the man in the middle of this photo, he actually made that sign. The welcome humans, we've been expecting you, with the yellow crazy ant. They were the last crew to go out to Johnston, and they completed the adaptive hand searching, 4 rounds of hand searching with no ants detected. So with that, we were able to declare eradication on the island. And the proof is kind of in the pudding as far as how it helped the wildlife. So this is every year we would do an all island MIC or mean incubation count for red-tailed tropic birds. That's basically going and lifting up every single tropic bird with a stick. You kind of like put a little stick under them and gently lift them up to see if they have an egg or a chick under them, searching the entire island. And you can see how the numbers have just grown exponentially. So February 2012, there were 5,000 nests. active nests on the refuge. And this was, that was already a couple of years into treating for yellow crazy ant. But by the time we left in 2021, there were nearly 13,000 nests. So this is the largest red-tailed tropic bird colony in the Pacific. And it's hugely, so that's the bird that you saw covered, swarmed with ants. They have benefited greatly from the eradication of the yellow crazy ant. So I'm the one talking to you guys today, but I am definitely, that this project is the success of so many people. We had over 100 people that deployed out to Johnston, staff and volunteers that, literally gave blood, sweat, and tears for this project. They braved wasp stings and swarming ants and swimming or bathing with sharks and, eating canned food for 6 months and brutal heat, and time away from family and loss of contact with the outside world to make this happen. And they did a phenomenal job. We have just one of the things I'm going to miss the most about Hawaii are just the amazing people that I work with, and just hugely dedicated, just have done such a wonderful thing out here, and their impact is going to be felt for years to come. So mahalo nui loa, or thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you guys have about this project or about the monument and the Pacific Islands.
Kate, thank you. We thought it's important for all of us to remember how extensive the refuge system is. And you've really done that in so many ways. The history at the beginning, a place that maybe none of us will ever visit, but it's so wonderful to know it's there and that people are caring about this and caring about the habitat. And I just learned so much. I love that picture of was it strawberry hermit crabs? Yes.
Yeah, that's strawberry hermit crabs. One of the cool things, those day beacons, especially on Baker, we have photos. If you ever go to Flickr, the Fish and Wildlife Flickr account, and just search up Pacific Remote Islands, there's some amazing photos of the monument in there. And some of my favorite are of the strawberry hermit crabs on Baker. That day beacon, it has a little area inside. It's just a brutally hot island the inside of that day beacon will be about 6 feet deep with hermit crabs or to escape the sun. So there are photos of that, and they're fantastic, of just the hermit crabs just piled in there to get some shade.
So I'm sure people have some questions or comments. So please feel free to unmute yourselves, and anybody you can physically raise your hand if you turn on your video. Who'd like to start with a question for Kate? Paul.
Yeah, Kate, thanks very much. It was a great presentation. My question is, have this ever been done before to this extent where you eradicated so many ants at some other place? And
go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry.
I'm just curious. And what takeaways did you get? What did you learn from this process? Can you apply that if this happens again in the future with another, different species of ant?
It's an excellent question. I am not aware of an ant being eradicated in such a large area. Definitely not on any of our islands. That's not something that we've been able to do before. This was the first time that we've been able to do this. I don't know if it's been done elsewhere in the world. I do know that there are several people who are interested in our methods, and one of the next steps is to go ahead and do some publishing of the project and the science behind it and kind of how it was done. So yeah, it's I'm not sure if it's been done maybe in different parts of Asia or the Pacific, Oceania, has been done elsewhere. But again, one of the harder parts of it, or the harder things about it, is that very few places will you find a situation where you can get rid of an insect like that and not affect other insects that you want to have. But there are plenty of islands like Christmas Island, which I believe is off the coast of Australia, where there's a huge yellow crazy ant problem. This may be a way to try and treat those ants there. Wake Atoll, there's an island, Peel Island, that has yellow crazy ant, and the Air Force is interested in partnering with us to try and eradicate the yellow crazy ant on Peel as well. So yeah, it's something that it'll be interesting to see kind of how it plays out. We've never been able to really determine, though, because we want to say like this is the first time such an eradication has happened, but we don't really have that information to be able to say that for sure.
Okay, thanks very much.
Kate, one of our participants posted something in the chat box, and she wanted to know if the ants are permanently gone, or if you'll continue to monitor. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, so while we don't have cast on the island anymore, Johnston basically goes back to that periodic, every couple of years we go down and we check things out, and we do these rapid ecological assessments. And that's how we assess things on all of the islands that we're not spending time year round, like Palmyra. So as of right now, the ant has been eradicated. We do need to be vigilant about making sure that they don't come back. Our biosecurity measures that I was mentioning briefly, we are very, very careful about when we travel to these islands, what we're bringing, ensuring that any ships that are coming in have been had hull inspections and DRAT inspections, and because even worse than ants is the potential for rats to get on an island. Johnston actually has mice, house mice, which have been shown in other places like Midway to attack seabirds. So it's a constant concern, and it's very easy to transport invasive species from one place to another, particularly when Oahu, which is the closest, Honolulu is the closest port, has all of these things. So I've seen ants on the boats that we traveled on. So trying to make sure that you bug bomb everything before you bring it out onto the island. You're bringing only new gear that's soft out onto the island. You're checking every single thing that you're bringing out there to make sure that there is nothing on it, that you don't have a seed, you don't have a gecko egg, you don't have a bug that's hiding in a little hole in one of those places. So we take that really seriously, and we also severely limit access to the island because of that. The Air Force already limits access to the island because of the contaminants issues. They don't want random people kind of wandering around there. The contaminants, they are there. They are not a direct danger in the sense that we would never have put people out there if they were gonna, have major health issues. We have a contaminants biologist on staff. She likes to say, as long as you don't eat the dirt, snort the dirt, or eat the fish, you'll be fine. So it's one of those things that you just need to make sure you're washing your hands before you're eating. You're not digging any holes. You're not doing any of that kind of stuff that's getting you. The plutonium that's out there is not an alpha emitter. It's not something that you need to put a suit on or anything. You just need to not disturb the dirt. So to answer your question, we will continually check out the area and hope to God that the ants never find their way back and that our biosecurity measures are enough. But you never know. There could be a trespasser. We have a vessel tracking software that we keep an eye on the boats that go around the monument so that somebody's getting too close to an island, we can reach out to them. But not everybody leaves their AIS system that's supposed to, ping their location on, especially when they're doing something they shouldn't be. So there's always the risk of trespass and reintroduction.
Other questions, comments? Anybody have thoughts that I was interested in the Tangier expedition? Is there anything written about that?
I believe I got some of those photos I got from like Wikipedia.
Hey, why not?
Or just did like a Google search of the photos because we don't have those in our archives or anything. But yeah, I believe, the Tangier expedition was sponsored in part by the Bishop Museum, which is a museum here in Hawaii that's history and natural history. And I'm certain that they have a lot of those kind of original documents and things like that from the Tangier expedition. So yeah, I'm sure or Tanager expedition.
Tanager, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll just put it in the chat. I'm sure if you just do a Google search on it, you'll find some really great stuff about the places they went to.
I think the Wells, Martha, Pat?
Yeah, I have a question about the ants coming in. Since they were swarming birds, is it a possibility they could actually come back on migrating birds?
Great question. I don't think it would be likely just because of the distance that the birds go. I mean, they're not really migratory in the sense that, when you think about migratory birds that are going from a cold place to a warm place, for the winter, they're migratory in the sense that they are flying extensive lengths to get food within the ocean. So, the ocean ecosystem, one of the complaints people have about the monuments are, why are they so big? Why do you need such an expansive area? It's because the ocean ecosystem is so big. If you want to protect it, you've got to look at it as a whole. You're not just protecting the bird on the land, you're protecting the fish that's 50 miles out. So, given how isolated they are, I don't really see that like a red-tailed tropic. We have red-tailed tropic birds here on East Oahu. I don't see those tropic birds going to Johnston. They're going to stay around Oahu. They're going to nest here, and they're going to fly around Oahu to get their food. So, and I think it would be really hard for an ant to kind of hang on that long, even if they did make a long trip. But that's a great question. And there are some, we have had some natural migrations of like the Hawaiian short-eared owl, the pueo, which is a subspecies of the mainland short-eared owl that has made it to Johnston on its own. So, there are some birds that are able to do that, but I'd be more concerned about seeds. Like there's a plant called sancris, or an invasive sandbur, that can, it's like they call them pokies here instead of prickers. We used to call them prickers in the Northeast. But it's like Velcro, like, that the seeds will attach, and I've seen birds covered in that. And we've done sancris eradication or attempted to do sancris eradication in different places. So I could see sancris maybe getting to an island on a bird, but probably not an ant.
Thank you.
Likely would come in on stuff like our stuff.
Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, Kathy?
Yes.
Yeah,
Steve.
I'm interested in the ants themselves. I know nothing about them. Do they actually have little mounds, and how big is a ant's nest, surface-wise?
I don't think they don't necessarily have mounds. I've never seen, I've seen plenty of yellow crazy ants here on Oahu. We don't really have any mound ants per se. I think they're more, they build their colonies in crevices and cracks and holes in the ground. The yellow crazy ant, it is a larger ant, and it's a lighter color, like why they call it yellow, and they're called crazy because of their like erratic motions. They respond to like being, if somebody like the bird, you saw the bird like trying to shake them off, and they really respond to that. So that's when they start spraying acid and kind of, they move fast and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I've seen ants around my neighborhood, yellow crazy ants around my neighborhood. And it's usually, they have very long legs as well, which is one of the ways that I've been able to tell. It's their lighter color and their long legs is how I've picked them out when I've just been walking around.
Thank you.
Good question. How did you like finding out this program as far as just knowing more about the refuge system?
Awesome. It's amazing. I'm so, I started to watch and listen to you and I'm thinking, am I in the right program? But then I finally realized that you were just giving us the overview of this gigantic area that is part of the refuge that we don't even think about. That was really awesome. Thank you. That was good.
Oh, thanks.
And you,
Yeah, I had thought about that when I was like, ooh, 45 minutes. I don't know if I can get the entire, like, I don't think the story of the eradication itself will really cover the 45 minutes, but like to really kind of put you, place is a big deal in Hawaii. And especially in Hawaiian culture, like when you introduce yourself in Hawaiian culture, you talk about where you're from, like where, and it's very specifically like where you get your water, is how you would describe it. So place is really important. And I felt the need, like, I really need to set the stage of the place and the monuments in general and the Pacific in general and where Johnston fits in all of that.
the history is, I mean, we just don't have those kinds of remnants of events around here. Not quite that dramatic. Impressive. Oh, so Evelyn has a question.
Yeah, Evelyn has a question. So refresh my memory where the yellow crazy ants are native, and in that spot, what's their natural predator or what keeps them under control naturally?
Yeah, so I am not 100% sure the answer to either of those questions. I believe what I've seen, they aren't sure if they're native to Africa or Asia. I think like Australasia is probably the best guess of where these ants came from, in particular, how they got to Hawaii and then how they got to our islands. But as far as natural predators, I'm honestly not sure what natural predators are. If they have them, you know, they're definitely not on Johnston natural predators of the ant.
So yeah, I thought it was sort of a, I don't know what kind of omen. My husband found an ant on our bedroom wall this morning. And it was like, really today? You know, but so yeah, and I'd have trouble telling you what the natural predators are of ants here. So yeah. So.
And there's probably songbirds and stuff like that that'll, you know, maybe eat some of the ants. I know in around my house here, geckos will eat the ants. But you know, again, the yellow crazy ants are a little bit more aggressive, so they may not bother with those. They may aim for the more chill ants that you see.
Kathy, and
Yes.
just on the predators of ants, in our yard, we get flickers eating ants a lot. And they're the only woodpeckers that will come to the ground to feed, but they love ants.
True.
No native songbirds on Johnston.
No.
Birds.
Questions before we allow Kate to go back to bed and catch up.
Finish my bagel.
Finish your bagel. So, Kate, we really thank you for getting up early. Kate has decided we offer honorariums to our presenters, and she's asking us to send her honorarium to her friends group. So we will be so happy to do that, and thank you for sharing that and supporting your friends group as you always have. So we will look forward to your coming back to the East Coast.
When are you coming back? When are you coming?
I will, so I start the job remotely. So I will start the job on April 24th, but want to get my kids through the school year. I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. So who are going to have a really hard time with leaving Hawaii, period. So we will be physically there in June. I will visit
Wow.
the office June 13th. So please look me up, come visit me in Delaware.
And you know, you're always welcome at Great Swamp too. We'd love to see you back here and so on. But thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day. And to whoever you're rooting for, I hope that team wins this evening. So happy Super Bowl to all of you too. So, and Kate, many, many thanks. This was just an incredible program. So we thank you so much. So, and we're getting lots of people in the chat saying thank you. It was wonderful. And so thank you.
Thank
See you next month. All right.